Chapter 4, A Case of the Mondays. Journal entry, Monday, March 24th, 2035.
Deer Harbor, Washington.
5:45 a.m. I hadn't heard from Kate since she left my place on Saturday. She was clearly still upset, I get it, but this felt more like a cold shower than the cold shoulder. Kate was no dummy, and I know that what she wanted to see was action. Not just more placating her emotions with my disingenuous words. I was going to that damn therapy appointment come hell or water high. I had just plopped a glob of Leopold's cat food into his dish and went to grab my keys, and of course, did not know where they were. It always amazed Kate that I could memorize hundreds of numbers and images, but when it came to me remembering where I left my keys, I was completely inept. I reached for my smartphone, which had an app that would locate my keys for me. I clicked the app and listened for the little tune it spits out. A faint sound could be heard from the back of the house. I ran down the main hallway and then stood still again, holding my breath to ensure the app's jingle had complete auditory isolation.
Aha.
Taking a few steps, and then freezing back into a statue pose. I was getting closer and closer. Finally, I came to the spot where it had to be. It sounded like it was coming from Leo's cat tree. So I reached inside the great unknown and felt around. "What the hell?" I said as my hand recoiled. "There's something dead in here." Leo's cat tree was often used for more than just lounging. This wouldn't be the first time I had pulled dead carcasses out of it. With the help of my phone's flashlight, I peered in, and sure enough, dead things and one shiny, inanimate object, my keys. As much as I was disgusted at the notion of putting one of my appendages in there, I reached into the feline dungeon. I pulled out a dead bird that was well past the beginning stages of decomposition. Then I put my hand back in, dreading what foul thing my hand might brush against. Luckily, it was nothing gross. I pulled my keys out and bolted for the door. The house phone started to ring right as I was shutting the door from the outside. I opted to let the machine get it, as I was already going to be late.
Nate, it's me, Kate. Hello? Nathan? Well, I'm working from home today, for obvious reasons. But give me a call later and let me know how it went, okay?
I fumbled the phone in my clumsy hands and heard her say,
I love you, Nate.
right as I put it to my ear.
Hello? Kate? You there?
It was too late. She had hung up. I was about to put the phone back on the receiver when I heard something subtle in the background. At first it was slight, but then increased. Some kind of digital interference and a growl. I pulled the phone away and stared at it for a moment, shook my head, tapped it on the table a couple of times, and listened again. This time all I heard was the
Digital tinnitus.
of a dead signal. I hung up and walked outside to my car. As I approached my car, I was overcome with a spell of dizziness and forgot completely where I was or what I was doing. I shook my head several times, hoping to detach the cobwebs of my mind. I opened the door. I climbed into the front seat and turned the ignition on, still unsure of why I was getting in my car and where I was supposed to go. That growl echoed in my mind. I suddenly felt something in my hand and looked down. The bird. I was still holding it, and it was alive. How was that possible? I quickly opened the door and released the bird, which flew up and away and out of my sight. A wave of nausea suddenly hit me, and I heaved as my guts wrenched but produced nothing.
Except, that is,
A violent display of madness to Mrs. Ellman, who just happened to be walking by with her plush white
Bichon Frise.
both of whom looked upon me with frightened amusement.
I'm okay.
I said as they hurried by, turning once or twice back around, either by curiosity or fear. I shook my head in disbelief. That bird had been gnawed and chewed up like cat bubble gum. There was no way it could have survived.
Perhaps it wasn't as dead as I thought. Or maybe it was just playing dead.
I was sure there was a rational explanation, but this would have to be something I considered later. I was late. I sat and collected myself for a moment before pushing the ignition button. The engine roared to life and also seemed to spark new life in me. I suddenly felt better and now remembered my mission.
Therapy. Yay.
My tires screeched and I headed off, with Mrs. Ellman glaring at me from my rearview mirror and shaking her head. The doctor's office was in Seattle, which was a few hours away and only accessible by taking an hour-long trip
By ferry to the mainland.
followed by a 2-hour drive into Seattle. I love living in Deer Harbor, except on days when I actually had to do, well, just about anything. There were no therapists in Deer Harbor. There wasn't really much of anything, except peace and quiet. I would take the serenity and tranquility Deer Harbor offered any day over the convenience of a big city. Alas, it would be a planes, trains, and automobiles type of day for me. Going to Seattle was somewhat exciting since I rarely left the comfort of my 4 acres of heaven in Deer Harbor, though the city can be beautiful. Seattle's architecture is both modern and antiquated at the same time, punctuated with water, mountains, and a burgeoning megacy industry. It really was quite an amazing city, but still one I didn't want to live in. Dr. K's office was located downtown in a swanky high-rise tower. I tended to look at the money one was able to spend on luxuries in their profession as a direct result of their skill and talent. I understand completely that this is biased, but I've found that you do get what you pay for in life. And boy, would I be paying for it at $350 an hour. The cost of parking was nearly as painful at $20 for up to 2 hours. I would say it was highway robbery, but this parking lot was more like a clogged artery. Speaking of it, I never really understood that idiom. Were people getting robbed on highways often enough for it to become a common phrase? I had very little practice with how these modern parking structures worked, so it was with much trepidation that I reached out and tapped the green button to get my voucher. A voice ushered me in and said,
Welcome to 2 Union Square. Please be respectful of the parking rules.
"Rules too, huh?" $20 was apparently not enough to appease the parking gods. Now I had rules I must adhere to as well. Eventually, I found a spot to park that would offer me a glorious view of the sea of cars that I must now travail. After I parked, I knew I wanted to keep my unwanted thoughts at bay before strolling into a new setting and decided I needed another bout of 2 minutes of hate. I cranked the volume knob to 9, which ensured a proper quenching of mind-numbing music, and hit play. The song D.I.G., which was on repeat, blotted out all other thought. A man wearing a suit and dragging a trolley full of documents cautiously avoided me by taking a longer than necessary path around my car. After my 2 minutes of hate, I found the elevators and rode a vacant receptacle all the way up to floor 54, which was surprisingly fast and felt like it was somehow taking me into the future. As I exited the time machine, I looked left, then right, and spotted a sign that read, Dr. Carrington, Ph.D., C.H.T. I guess I was in the right place, or the wrong place, considering my aversion to therapy. I opened the door to Dr. K's office. I was standing in a small room with a few chairs,
Prints of Van Gogh's later work.
eccentric decor options, and a little wooden carving that looked out of place. It said,
Believe in Gamagia.
on the wall was a little button that said, please push the button and have a seat. Easy enough, I pushed the button and sat down. It reminded me of some sort of decontamination chamber. Would there be little misters protruding from the wall spraying some sort of chemical cocktail to prevent me from contaminating the sterile office? As I was pondering the excessive level of security this place seemed to have, a voice came through a little speaker and said,
Mr. Carlyle?
Yes? I said before realizing I had to push the green button to speak. Pressing it in, I said, yes, this is me, I'm Nate. This is Mr. Carlyle, hi. Talk much?
Dr. Carrington will see you now.
I was certain I recognized the voice. Just then, the door made an electrical buzzing sound, and I opened it and walked through. You must be Nancy, I said to the cheerful-looking woman as I approached the main counter.
Yes. Well, hello, Mr. Carlyle.
She looked about 60, but I guess she was probably adrift somewhere in her 50s. As I got closer, I could see that she was indeed not a lizard person, and therefore must be a smoker. My suspicions were confirmed as I got even closer, and the faint smell of cigarette smoke offended my immediate area. I could tell that she expended a lot of effort to cover up the unmistakable smell with perfumes and mouthwash. But the mingling of these aromas smelled like it came from a witch's brew and made me more nauseous than the aroma of cigarettes alone ever had. Regardless of her off-putting scent, she had the disposition of a person who'd never experienced an awful day in her life and who wanted to make sure no one else did either. I almost never fully smiled, but Nancy made it nearly impossible to constrain my full, boyish grin. If it wasn't for the odor she gave off, I didn't think giving her a hug would be that out of the ordinary, although it certainly was. Right? A quandary I would wrestle with later. My mild Asperger's often propelled me into even more awkward situations.
Okay, Mr. Carlyle, we have you all set.
She said, handing me a quire of paper forms to fill out.
You just need to fill these out and check mark next to any pre-existing conditions. Got it?
And what about paranormal activity? Is there a pre-existing condition checkbox for that? I said, straight-faced, trying out my dry humor. For a moment she stopped and looked at me strangely. I thought she might laugh. Instead she nodded and said,
Yes, Mr. Carlyle, all of it.
A mild blush swept across my face as I grabbed the clipboard from her and went back to my seat. I never blamed others for not getting me. Most of the time, I didn't get me. Yet somehow Kate found my weird social behavior endearing. I was finished filling out the paperwork and amusing myself with a game on my phone when I heard,
Mr. Carlyle, I presume?
Looking up, I was amazed to find a woman in jeans sporting a tie-dye t-shirt. Her hair was coarse, streaked with gray, and tied in a ponytail that frayed out like the bristles of a broom. Maybe the elevator truly was a time machine, because this woman had resisted the urge most people have to accept the era in which they now occupy. Deep wrinkles encompassed her eyes and mouth when she smiled and welcomed me. She walked with a certain grace and confidence that was rare and a bit intimidating. You presume correctly, I said, returning a smile and shaking her hand. She motioned for me to follow her with her hand, which looked like it might double for a jewelry stand. Her wrists and fingers were covered with all types of rings, beads, and strings. She brought me back into a room that looked more like a shrine to Buddha than a professional's penthouse office. I was a bit surprised, but I have often found that the stranger and more eccentric people are, the more brilliant they prove to be. We sat across from each other, her in a nice office chair and me in a beanbag chair. All part of the charm, I surmised. I guessed that the act of making the patient sit in the beanbag chair was to subconsciously put them at ease, or perhaps it was a power play. Either way, it was awkward, and I was not at ease. She looked at me inquisitively.
So, Mr. Carlyle.
Nate's fine, I interrupted. She smiled, wrinkles populated in even greater numbers than before.
So, Mr. Nate, what can I help you with? Why are you here?
I have no idea, I thought, and then realized I didn't just think it as I heard the words tumble out of my mouth. I mean, I'm mostly here because my girlfriend wanted me to come, but I have been having an issue sleeping. I continued shifting nervously in my beanbag chair.
Mm-hmm.
She hummed, letting me know to continue. Well, it's kind of, complicated, I said, and she shot a look at me that suggested a little clinical disbelief. For the next 20 minutes, I explained the specifics of my episodes, and she sat there quietly listening and taking notes in a little notebook adorned with psychedelic designs. Big surprise. After I was finished, she sat quietly for a moment, then removed her glasses and said,
Nate, have you ever gone under?
Nope, never been to Australia, I said, trying to break the ice, although I think I was the only one whose nerves were frozen. I waited a moment for a laugh or a smile, but she returned neither to me. Instead, the ice cap only grew in size as she studied me for a moment and marked something down in her notebook. I know what you meant, Doc. Have I ever been hypnotized?
Precisely.
She said, putting her glasses back on. Suddenly, she got up and went over to her desk.
I'd like to try something with you. If you're up for it.
And pulled what looked like a pendulum necklace off a nearby stand with a hook. This pendulum warranted its own jewelry stand, and I got the idea that she held it in high regard. I knew where this was going. I haven't, but you're the doctor, I said, shrugging my shoulders.
Correct you are, Mr. Nate.
She then motioned me over to the beanbag couch, of course, which was actually very comfortable. She dragged her chair near me and got close enough that I could smell a mixture of patchouli and some sort of vegan breakfast on her breath. I tried to not let this distract my focus. I was never really into this whole New Age movement, but I figured it couldn't hurt. I'll try anything once, I thought.
Do you mind if I record the session, Nate?
she asked as she placed a small digital recorder on a small table between us.
I suppose I don't see a problem with that,
I said.
as she clicked the record button and began swinging the pendulum over me.
Okay, Nate. Just listen to my voice and watch the movement of the necklace.
Things started to happen much quicker than I expected as she began the hypnotherapy session.
6. Falling deeper. 5. Continue to fall deeper and deeper. 4. Even deeper now. Imagine yourself walking down into a deep void. You feel warm and your movements are slow.
I felt my consciousness slipping, and my body felt like it was floating. Then, blackness.